This is the legend of a man named Cameron. Like most Canadians, hockey and sport were some of the most influential pastimes in Cameron's life. Even at an early age, Cameron knew that sport would have some place in his professional life. This would culminate in Cameron's adventures at Carleton University's communications program, where Cameron would find his groove in everything from story editor to broadcast commentary to communications management. Cameron was happy. And then one day, something unbelievable would happen. Something that would change his life forever. One day, Cameron would receive a call to work for a professional sports and entertainment group in Manitoba. However, this wasn't just any group. This was the True North Sports and Entertainment Group, the same group which owns a team called the Winnipeg Jets. The Winnipeg Jets weren't just any team. They were an NHL team featuring the best hockey players in the world. Cameron would receive the opportunity of a lifetime, manager of social media for the Winnipeg Jets. Instantly, Cameron would be on the front lines of every NHL arena, following and capturing the memorable moments and stories of the Winnipeg Jets, as well as capturing history in the process. Cameron's skills and expertise brought him this incredible opportunity, and he continues to thrive in this capacity to this very day. Communications expert, content creation extraordinaire, and a master storyteller, Cameron has told the success stories of many hockey players. But now it is time to tell his success story, his adventures, his legend. This is the legend of Cameron Penney. Cameron, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
What an intro. It's great to hear your announcer voice again. That brings back so many memories as well.
Oh, thank you. And it certainly does also on my end as well. So the first time that we met was actually, as you know, at Carleton.
Yeah.
And it was also with a mutual friend of ours, Carlos Verdi, as well. Yeah. Yep. So we go back a long time, almost 10 years, well, around 8 years, but just about getting to about a decade. So lots have happened since then. And
don't say a decade. That makes me feel so old. I guess that's 8 years already. But yeah, I just remember, was it MMP Park back then at Carleton University? And it was like my first week on campus. I'm there for like reporting on men's soccer. And you just hear this booming PA voice as you walk in. I'm like, man, whose voice is that? And I get up to the press box, and that's where I met you. And I was like, oh, man, this guy is unbelievable.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, no, and that was the same year, if I recall correctly. It was still called Keith Harris Stadium. And then MNP just sponsored and got the naming rights to it in October 2015. So it was just around that time.
Right around that turnover, yeah.
Yeah. So it was still called the CIS back then, the Canadian University Sport, and then
I like to think it's still called the CIS.
Yeah, I personally like that name too. That's a better name. So better name. So like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, we first met back at Carleton, but let's go further back than that. Go back to the very beginning for you. What inspired you to pursue journalism / communications?
I don't think it's too much of a unique story. I think I was very passionate about hockey, obviously, and I realized also from an early age that I was never going to play in the NHL. I definitely did not have the talent or athleticism for that, and I kind of thought about it a bit, and I was like, well, if I can't play in the NHL, maybe I can still work in the NHL. And I remember having that thought in like grade 6 or grade 7 or something. Like how old are you at that point? Like 12 maybe, like super early on. So that's kind of what got the gears rolling. And I started reading a lot of like sports, like nonfiction books at that time. And one of the ones was James Duthie's first book. That was like the day I almost killed 2 Gretzky's. And in that book, one of the things he talked about was going to Carleton journalism. And so I was in like grade 8 or something like that. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's it. I'm going to Carleton journalism. I And that's kind of how the ball got rolling in terms of working in sports.
Wow, that's fascinating. And as you mentioned, James Duthie, also a fellow Carleton alum as well, longtime sportscaster and longtime personality, well-known personality here in Canada on TSN, the sports network, for those who are unfamiliar with the name of that network. Yeah, he's a legend in his own right. I remember very clearly that one video. I think this would have been over almost 10 years ago now. Oh my goodness. Where he was just on camera and he decided just to tear off his suit and just wear the Carleton Ravens sweater. Oh man, that's nostalgic, honestly.
Yeah.
In fact, enough, you know what? Enough of this monkey suit. Hold on. Let's wear it. Gotta wear if you're gonna be on here talking about the pride, gotta wear the pride. Gotta wear the pride. Gotta put the mic back on, but you still gotta wear the pride. Ravens. Forever. Caw-caw! Caw-caw! You don't actually do that, do you? Never mind. Anyway, have fun tonight. You deserve it. And thank you for making it great to be a Raven again. Caw-caw! Caw-caw!
Yeah, no. And going back to you, though, I mean, with that sort of an early influence, what other influences were there and other experiences that you had back in your grade school days that influenced you to, go down this path?
Oh boy. I think I would have been maybe around 10 when I met like an NHL player for the first time. Like that was Duncan Keith. So he was born in Winnipeg, but then his family moved to Fort Frances when he was 2 years old. And he lived there until he was about 14 before he moved to Penticton. So just as he was starting to establish himself as an NHL player, he came back to Fort Frances one summer and, spoke to a bunch of kids and did an autograph signing. So that was a pretty cool moment that I still remember. And I think that's what kind of pushed me forward. Eventually, like I said, I realized I didn't have the skill set necessarily to play, but it really was part of that fueling that passion for hockey. And in Fort Frances, like hockey was just so big, right? Like I was involved in minor hockey and I did officiating and refereeing for a bit when I got older. And so hockey was always my number one and a really strong interest in sports. And it just ended up combining with some of the other skill sets I developed over the years. And yeah.
That's great. That's great. So please correct me if I'm wrong. So you were born and raised in Fort Frances.
Yeah.
Right. So what was life like back then?
Yeah. So it's a really small community. It's about 8,000 people. So it's not on the Trans-Canada Highway, so you don't get as much like tourism. And it's right on the Minnesota border. So you've got Fort Frances, Ontario, and then right across the river is International Falls, Minnesota. And so one of the stories I love telling people, because it's just when you grow up there, it's just normal, but you tell other people about it and they think it sounds crazy, is Fort Frances doesn't have a movie theater. So you go across the river to International Falls to go to the movies. So you're entering a whole nother country just to go see like the latest like Spider-Man movie, right? So, and then we'd like gas up over there because gas at gallons per American dollar is cheaper than Canadian dollars per liter. The grocery stores like dairy and stuff would be cheaper. They'd have different school snacks. So you'd like go back to the border crossing to re-enter Canada. And they're like, okay, where are you from? Fort Frances. How long were you across the river for? 3 hours. Oh, what were you doing over there? Oh, we went and saw Spider-Man and got a tank of gas. And then the border officer just like, because they live in the community too. So they're just like, oh, what'd you think of Spider-Man? And you go, oh, I loved it. And they're like, oh, the last couple of cars said the same thing. So it's really unique just kind of living in this border town where you're going to the United States, like just to go get a different fast food option or maybe go get some back to school clothes or something like that. So really small town, and it's like right on the lake as well. So I was really lucky that my grandparents had a cabin growing up. So in the summertime, you're going swimming in the lake and going fishing and stuff. And they've got a bass tournament every year in Fort Frances. So I remember Dustin Bufflin coming to town when I was a teenager to fish in the bass tournament. So yeah, it's a really great community for sure.
Oh yeah, that sounds exciting. Even just hearing it from my end as well. And it's border towns have always fascinated me because, and there's another example that I know of, which is the one that Stansted, Quebec.
Okay.
So that place, it's funny because one of their streets is literally called Canusa Street because it's literally the border. It's literally the border. You drive on one side is Canada, the other side is America's. Yeah. So, and there are houses on either side of the of the street. So it's like if you kick a ball over, it's like, is it against the law to pick up my soccer ball from across the street?
I've never heard of that one before.
Yeah, no, I think there's a great YouTube video on that. Because it's again, it's a border town, but it's literally like right on the border, and there's one of the streets literally is on the border. But no, it's fascinating because you kind of get the best of both worlds, especially on your end at Fort Francis. You get all the best Canadian stuff, all the best American stuff, and man, you're living life.
Exactly.
Yeah. So from that simple but exciting life, then going over to Ottawa, I can imagine that there would have been so many challenges that you had to face. What were the greatest challenges that you faced?
I think just for me, it was being in a big city. I remember the first time I went to Ottawa, just like to go get groceries by myself. And so obviously like a super hyper specific story that only Ottawa people connect the dots on. But so obviously residents at Carleton, and I took the bus to Billings Bridge and went to the mall there to just grab some things from the grocery store. And I figured, well, okay, the bus dropped us off on this side of the street, so we'll go grab the bus on the opposite side of the street to go back to Carleton. And I don't know how we screwed it up, but we ended up on the same bus that was heading like on the same route, right?
Oh, no.
So we rode it for like 30 minutes before we realized like, hey, we're in the suburbs and like it only took us like 10 minutes to get to Carleton. Like, where are we? So we just like hopped off the bus and crossed the street and waited for the next one. And so it took us like 10 minutes to get to Billings Bridge. And then with the groceries, it took us an hour and a half to get home because we were confused by the buses. So that was pretty funny. I think just like academically, like Carleton was a really interesting time. Just because like, I just think like looking back, like middle school, high school, I never really faced a lot of adversity academically. So maybe like once I came across some adversity, I wasn't necessarily mature enough or prepared enough to handle it in the right ways. So that kind of resulted in some problems in my first year communications at Carleton and finishing the degree at University of Ottawa. But I wouldn't change any of it because I think all those lessons learned along the way really helped form me into the person I am today. Yeah, no,
that's absolutely, important to remember for anyone in our audience who will be a future student at a university. It's certainly, there's certainly a transition barrier. There's also a challenge that you go from high school to university. I experienced it too, like myself, even though I came from Mississauga, which is a big city in its own right, the sixth largest city in terms of population in all of Canada. And even though I had family in Ottawa, it was still different because I was on my own too. So being able to get through that first year especially was really, really, really important. And well, I mean, as you and I both know, we both made it through. We graduated, thank goodness. So
yeah, when I need a lawyer, I know who to call.
All right. Yeah. So now that we're at Carleton, early on in your time in journalism and in communications, you worked as a contributor and as a story editor at the Charlatan.
Yeah.
So what were your daily tasks in both of those roles, and how did you cover sport at Carleton and also the rest of U Sports with these guys?
Yeah, so that was probably like the one element where I was ready to hit the ground running when I got to Carleton, because in my last year of high school, I did a co-op placement with my local newspaper, the Fort Francis Times. And so at the time that I worked there, it was one of only 6 independent daily newspapers that was left in Canada. And so as a co-op student, I was basically like on the high school beat. So just like writing about stuff that was going on at the high school, like getting pictures and writing a story about like the musical they were putting on that spring, like stuff like that. So it was a really good experience where I was just kind of chipping in one article a week. And then it was cool because like I'd write the article, and obviously the editor was crazy busy running the whole paper. So he would like print out the story I submitted and then print out the published story. And it was on me to compare the 2 articles and figured out what he changed and why. So it was a really interesting way to learn. But so basically, when I showed up on Carleton campus, I already had like 6 months of writing newspaper articles under my belt, which was pretty cool. So, and in Fort Frances, there wasn't really much of an opportunity to write about sports yet. So when I got to Carleton and they're like, oh yeah, you can go write about the men's soccer game this weekend, I was like super excited for that. So that was really cool. Just being it was just on a volunteer basis. And like, so every weekend I was at like the soccer field or the hockey rink. Maybe I should have spent a few more of the weekends in the library, but again, it worked itself out. I got to write about sports that I had never heard of before, like in Fort Frances, like rugby and water polo, like just aren't really, it's not talked about. It's not a thing. I'd never really heard about it before I went to Ottawa. So learning about these new sports and writing about it was really cool. My first year at Carleton, so the head coach of the men's hockey team at Carleton University was a guy named Marty Johnston. And so in the time since, Marty has now become the assistant coach of the Winnipeg Jets. And I'm now with the Winnipeg Jets. So it's just I get so excited whenever I see him around the rink, because it's just this reminder of like, hey, me and you used to both be working at this little 400-seat arena on Carleton campus. And now we're at this NHL rink together. Like how surreal is that? So that was really special. And so at that end of the first academic year, I ended up just as a volunteer. I contributed the most articles to the school paper, which was pretty cool. I got to dabble a bit in like the student radio and see what I thought about that. And like you said in the intro, I did some broadcasting as well at the hockey games. And I really did find that like writing was the number one passion. So I applied to be the sports editor for my second year of school, which was pretty young to take on that role, but I earned it. And it was a really good learning experience in terms of, being a leader and managing people and trying to, help other people learn and improve as writers, and also learning yourself as an editor. So it was a really special experience for sure. And it was definitely a big stepping stone along the way.
Yeah, a massive, massive stepping stone. And what continues to fascinate me is just how small the world of broadcasting, the world of sports coverage in general, and even just sports in general, is. It's a really, really small world. Like you mentioned Marty Johnston. Yeah, I still remember when he was coaching. Great coach, by the way, for the Carleton men's hockey team. And it's really one of the things that I find that is so important, really in every profession, but especially in sports, is the importance of networking. And especially in sports, given how small the world it is, you really don't know where it'll take you. And it'll take you somewhere, most of the time, it takes you to a really, really cool place. In your case, all the way over to Manitoba. But even before that, as we'll get to that point, going to the OHL and all these other opportunities, like it's not OHL, sorry, Major Junior Hockey, QMJHL, if I'm not mistaken. It's just fascinating. It's such a fascinating thing about the industry.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Like if we're looking on that trajectory, and so obviously I worked a number of years at the University of Ottawa, where I finished my degree, and that's where I kind of got the itch for working for a team and doing some internal communications and social media and stuff. And when I wanted to make that next step in my career, and I was willing to go anywhere and talking to a lot of different teams. And one of the teams I got talking to was the Moncton Wildcats. And one of the reasons that door opened up was because of the people that were willing to go to bat for me, and people that I'd worked with earlier in my career and had some really positive experiences. And they felt strongly about my skills as well. And they had connections with Moncton, and they said, hey, like this is a guy that you might be interested in talking to. And that's what opened the door just an inch. And then I kicked the door all the way open and made sure they couldn't say no.
Yeah. and that's a really, really great tactic that great sportscasters and great sports media people like yourself will always have to do in order to stay up to beat with the rest of the industry. And another thing that you also do is build rapport with each athlete. So at Carleton, how did you exactly do that?
Yeah, so I just remember because that was my first experience as a journalist, and it was really interesting because obviously at the university level, like the PR rules aren't as strict, right? So like ideally you do feed a lot of your media requests through the PR team, through the sports information group. but sometimes you just kind of go through it yourself. So it was really interesting, just as a journalist, that you're trying to build up this relationship with these coaches and these players. And you want to have a strong enough relationship that when you text them and say, hey, can we set up a phone call and do this interview to talk about your 2 road games over this past weekend, that they're going to want to pick up the phone and text you back and accept a call. But you also can't be too buddy with them, because you're like this impartial journalist that you're trying to, just present an objective story as to what happened. And then, like, I just remember when I made the switch to working for a team, and you're kind of a bit of the PR and the internal comms, and I was like, oh, well, this is journalism on easy mode. I only ever got to talk about the good stuff, and you can really build those positive relationships with the players because you don't got to worry about being impartial. So that was pretty interesting. But like, I just remember just like, just being around the rink all the time, I think really helped earn some respect that, okay, you're here every weekend as well, and you're watching the games and you know what's going on. And I remember in particular having really good success with a feature that I wrote where Carleton was running a tandem of 2 goalies that season where they were distributing the workload pretty evenly. And so I wanted to write a feature about that relationship between the 2 players. But hockey players, they're pretty selfless. They don't like talking about themselves. So the way I tackled the article was I only asked each goalie questions about their teammate. And so they spoke glowingly about each other, and it created this really good story that kind of just this flowed as them complimenting each other throughout and how they learned from each other and their strengths and their weaknesses. And it made for a really good feature. And some of those experiences were just a blast. Like, I still look at those university times so fondly.
Yeah. And it's funny because you and I, we're still extremely young, and we're experiencing already a bit of
talk about stuff that happened decades ago, but yeah, a decade ago.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, I should also probably mention that we both graduated from Carleton in 2018. So,
well, no, I was University of Ottawa 2019.
Oh, Ottawa. Sorry about that.
I needed the extra year, 2019.
Ah, okay. But still, I mean, what I was trying to say is that it wasn't that long ago. It was still quite recent. So what's interesting is that we still feel that kind of nostalgia for that time already. Normally, these kinds of feelings of nostalgia don't really happen until maybe 20 or 30 years later on in a person's life, but we're already experiencing it barely even 4 or 5 years in. So, and it just shows just how magical it was back at Carleton. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but there were a lot of great moments there. One of which, and you'll know this as well, is the rivalry between Carleton and uOttawa.
Yeah.
So what are your favorite moments that you've experienced in covering and also observing the rivalry?
Well, so I got to play both sides because I started off at Carleton as a student and then flipped over to uOttawa. So I got to experience wins at both. I think I came so close to like my first 2 years as a student at Carleton. The Ravens won the Panda game. And then I flipped over to uOttawa and GG's won Panda. And I was like, oh, if I go through this entire streak where they only ever win with the school I'm at, like how hilarious would that be? I don't think it panned out. But so Panda game is obviously, for people that haven't heard of it, this really famous football game in Ottawa between the 2 universities. And just like starting off as a journalist, that was a blast. And like I just remember as the sports editor in my second year, and we got the article out, like my writer was working the game, and then I got it edited and published on the website like within 30 minutes after the final buzzer. And I just remember us being all fired up because Mark Masters shared it on Twitter. And Mark's now the beat reporter for the Toronto Maple Leafs on TSN, but about just under 20 years ago, I think he was the sports editor of the Charlatan at Carleton University. And so I obviously had the same role that he had in the past. So Mark was obviously, just like James Duthie, a very proud Carleton alumni. And so he would still reshare some of the content we would put out from some of those big moments. So that was always exciting for us as students when he would go back. I remember my first year and I was a reporter, and I was sent to Halifax for the men's hockey team at the national championship. And Carleton, their first game, they lost in quadruple overtime to Saskatchewan. And I was doing this like live tweeting of the game. And as soon as I fired out that tweet that like Saskatchewan won the game, like Mark reshared it and had a comment on how great of a season the Ravens did. And that blew my mind, right? I was like 18 or something and realizing like, okay, Mark Masters was reading my tweets through the whole game. Oh, geez, I wish I tweeted a bit better. Like, but those big games, like, so obviously I was there for the University of Ottawa Gigi's men's hockey program being reestablished, which also brought the Colonel By Classic for the men's hockey. And then around that time, the women's hockey reestablished the Alerts Cup, which was really cool. So all those rivalry games were always just so exciting, whether you were as the reporter just writing about it, because it was just such a tentpole moment on the sports calendar, or eventually like when I was embedded with the men's and women's hockey teams at University of Ottawa and working for the team, those were always exciting as well, because you're playing from, uOttawa. I think their main facility seats about 1,000, Carleton's 400. So then you're moving over to TD Place Arena that sits like 8,000, I think, right? So just having that opportunity to have more people in the venue and just playing in a bigger venue was always so special.
Yeah, and I remember it too. I remember it very, very fondly. My favorite moment was the 2020 Capital Hoops Classic.
Yeah.
Because I think that game is representative, both the men's and the women's basketball teams. That game was representative of the entire rivalry as a whole. There's something about the rivalry that makes both Carleton and uOttawa play on an entirely different level than they would normally play. They're normally good teams in general, but especially there, it's basically almost the same as watching like a final NCAA March Madness basketball game. It may not necessarily be the same level, although that's a debate for a different time, but the feeling, the intensity had that time. And as you remember, I had the pleasure of calling that game on my first TSN broadcast. So having to call each game down to the last basket, I remember it was a 1-point differential. I'm like, I could barely even hold my own excitement at the time.
Those were special games, because especially like both programs, both the men and the women at both schools were so strong. Like there's so many times you go into that game and both teams, it's like February, you're just gearing up for playoffs, but both teams are either coming in both undefeated, or it's like national number 1 and national number 2. Like there's always so many cool storylines with those games that I think just sports fans in Ottawa are so lucky to get to experience that.
Yeah, there was one guy, I think he was the relative of one of the players, or two of the players, one who played for Carleton, one who played for uOttawa. He was wearing a sweater that was half Carleton, half uOttawa.
Yeah.
And I was like,
cool.
I was working with Lee Versage at the time. Lee Versage, who was one of the longtime hosts of TSN 1200 in Ottawa. And I was like, we got to get a picture of that guy. Like, we got to get him right now.
Bring him on the air, yeah.
Yeah, it's so magical. It's so magical. And as you mentioned, you would work full time with the uOttawa Gigi's as their associate sports information coordinator, which in a sense would be kind of the beginning of your communications management career. So in this role, to what extent is it different and similar to your previous roles within the Charlatan?
Well, I'd say it was very different for sure, because at the Charlatan, you're more of an independent sports media person. You're a journalist. At the University of Ottawa, I had fully pivoted to more of a communications kind of role, where working internally for the organizations and working alongside the media. So I remember, like in that role at uOttawa, I was running the post-game scrums, where I'm going to the student media and saying, hey, who do you want to talk to after the game? And I'll bring them out from the dressing room for you. Whereas just a couple years earlier at Carleton, it was the opposite, where I was going to the sports information person saying, hey, I want to talk to this guy after the game. But like that transition was less significant, because in my last 2 years as a student, 2-3 years as a student, I was running the social media for the Gigi's men's hockey. And then I was lucky enough to get to transition to that full-time role that you mentioned once I had the degree in hand. And so like one of the key elements of the job was I had so much success running the social media for the men's hockey, and to a lesser extent the women's hockey, that the university wanted to try and replicate that success across all of the main sports teams and athletics. And so I was tasked with, along with some other people, of course, but tasked with overseeing a team of interns that were taking on these roles to oversee a social media account for a team, just like I had done as a student. So it was kind of like I had elevated and taken that next step, where I had that student role running the account, and now I was like in this kind of full-time kind of mentorship role overseeing all these social media accounts. So that was pretty cool. And then the other value of that role too was, again, I was still working with all the sports teams. So in the fall, it was like Friday night, I was at the soccer game. And then Saturday, we've got this basketball game going on. And then Sunday, you've got the football game. And maybe there's rugby in there. There's swimming we got to make sure we've got proper coverage of. And I was working with all kinds of sports at University of Ottawa Athletics. And so one of the big keys for me was to just answer the question of, like, do I really want to fully commit to hockey? Or are there other sports that draw my interest as well? And so obviously the answer to that was hockey captured my heart 100%. I wanted to eventually take on a role where I was 100% focused on hockey. But yeah, like you said, like University of Ottawa, what a special place that I got the chance to work at.
Yeah, yeah. And, as we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, we met, well, many, many years ago over in 2015. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. We've known each other and we've worked with each other even throughout our time in Ottawa, respectively, as well.
I think we convinced you to cross the rivalry as well, right? Like, you were a Carleton student, and then we dragged you over to do some broadcasting and some announcing for University of Ottawa.
Yeah. So
remember that, right?
So I guess I can tell my side of the story. All right. So at the time, I guess a bit of backstory is, so I was about to graduate Carleton, and my goal was still intent on going to law school and becoming a lawyer. And I was thinking, okay, so I'm going to be attending the University of Ottawa's law school in 2018 at the time. And then I'm just thinking, it just wouldn't really make sense for me to have to commute to Carleton when I can just walk over.
I had that same experience.
I remember it was Jennifer Elliott at the time when she was still the sports information coordinator, and I think I called her or emailed her. I think I did both or something like that, because I normally do both or whatever. Yeah. And she was like, yeah. And then I forgot what the exact conversation was, but she was really very willing to have me on. And then the rest, I didn't know anything about, on your side, convincing me over. But yeah, it was actually quite a smooth transition. Everybody roast me, whether it's Carleton or uOttawa. Carleton people, especially Carleton alum, is just like, you traitor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mark Masters. Yeah, I met him in 2018, and we still kept in contact. And he was like, "Yeah, I see where you're getting that, but you still betrayed the Carleton Ravens." And then even some of the players over in uOttawa was like, "Oh, you work for the Carleton Ravens? So they gave me a little trash talk for it, but yeah, no, that was my rambly side of my story.
Hey, it's a great story. The legend of Amos.
Yeah, no, and as with all things, all chapters will come to an end, and your time in Ottawa would end, as would mine as well. But you would keep going on into major junior hockey, especially with the Moncton Wildcats. How did you get the opportunity?
Yeah, so just like we kind of talked about a bit earlier, I had that opportunity to just kind of connect with Moncton, and it was just a lot of conversations over time. But kept in touch with them, and the opportunity came on board to join them in a role that was geared towards community relations and fan experience. So it was a bit of a different skill set compared to what I had done in the past, but it was a really exciting opportunity, and to try something a bit new as well. And one of the things I learned at the University of Ottawa was just to be a bit versatile. So I remember, just like in terms of running that social media account for the hockey teams, I was, writing stories for the website. I was filming videos. I was editing the videos. Sometimes I would take pictures, doing graphic designs. You're doing a bit of marketing. You're pushing tickets a little bit. You're going to community events to capture that and showcase that part of the organization as well. So I was wearing all kinds of different hats. And so I think that's what brought some extra value to Moncton, was that I could come in and run these community programs and oversee some of the guest experience as part of the game day at the arena. But then in a pinch, I could also create a little video commercial that we could put on the Jumbotron, or create a little graphic animation to put on the Power Rings, or, whip up a quick little video to put on social media for the marketing team. Like it was just, I think just because I had all these different skill sets, like that's really valuable in junior hockey where you're working in an organization that maybe has 6 to 8 full-time staff, and a lot of people need to wear different hats and support each other in the different roles. So I think that really helped open the door there. And yeah, like Moncton, what a special place that is, and it's a great community and a great organization from the top down.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on this question as well. I was about to ask, how is major junior hockey similar to university hockey in terms of hockey coverage? It seems like it's quite similar, but it's also like an expansion of what you did before.
Like it was definitely like a step up. Like it was a natural progression for me in terms of like, if we look at the social media count, like University of Ottawa was maybe like 2,000 per platform, but then Moncton Wildcats was 20,000 per platform. So it was definitely a wider audience because, you know, Ottawa, the University of Ottawa and Carleton is a small fish in a big pond. Ottawa is very lucky to have so many different sporting events and opportunities to take in. You've got, you know, CFL, you've got independent baseball, you've got hockey, you've got major junior hockey, you've got junior A hockey, whereas Moncton, like the big tentpole sporting and entertainment option in the city is the Moncton Wildcats. You know, in terms of like the media coverage you talked about, like our hockey teams at University of Ottawa would be a lot of student reporters, and then occasionally you would get some of the bigger papers or say TSN radio at those big tentpole events that we talked about, like Panda and Curl by Classic. At Moncton, it was just like a couple of local newspaper writers that were just at the games. But then, you know, because it's a higher level of hockey, there's an additional element of exposure. So you've got players that could potentially be top prospects for NHL teams. You've got like NHL scouts coming in, or maybe some NHL writers that are focused on a certain player within the organization that could have a future in the NHL. So it's definitely like, to me, it's a natural step up is how I would compare university to junior hockey in terms of my career path. Because it's kind of opposite for the players, right? Because some of the players graduate from major junior and go to the university level. So when I was in the university level, the players were 21 to 25 years old, and I was like 18, right? So all the players were older than me, and I felt I had to earn that respect. And then I get to junior hockey and I'm 23, and all the players are 16 to 20. And then I felt that the respect was just given just because of my seniority and age compared to them, right? So that was a bit different and interesting as well. Just an experience that I remember standing out.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned age. Yeah, it's funny when you put it in that way, because 23 is not old at all, but it makes it feel old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, on top of that, I know how you mentioned, you know, Moncton. For over in that community, there's not really as many sports events as there are in Ottawa.
Yeah.
That brings me back to an earlier episode that I did on this podcast with Scott Russell, host of CBC Olympics Prime Time. He mentioned this exact point on a much larger macro scale as well. And I find it fascinating because that's one of the double-edged swords in sports in the 21st century. Because on one hand, you have a lot more content, but on the other hand, you've got a more fragmented audience depending on where you live and depending on what coverage you look at or what social media or mass media or broadcast media platforms that you have. Whereas back in the day, there weren't as many areas or many sports events happening, but when there was, that was the big event. So I mean, yeah, and that's different, as you mentioned, over in Moncton. But I would assume that kind of attention really changed the way how you approached the work at Moncton.
Yeah, well, it was really special just to be a part of such a big piece of the community, right? And just the timing that I arrived with the organization. So I had signed on to join the team, and just as part of the contract agreement was that I would come join the organization once the GG's hockey season had wrapped up. And the GG's were very lucky to make it to the national tournament that year. And the national tournament, unfortunately, before they got to play a game, was canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So as people were being told to stay home and kind of in flux, I'm kind of sitting there going, oh my goodness, I'm between jobs. So I was very lucky that I got to stay on with the Moncton Wildcats. And so one of the big things in that role in the early pandemic was just like finding ways to keep the community engaged, and you're almost wanting to help entertain in a way, right? So I just remember like when Zoom was first a thing and we're trying to figure out how do we do these Zoom calls with alumni and with current players and let fans know how they're all doing and tell some stories. So like the Moncton Wildcats are such a huge part of that community. When I was there, we were preparing for a 25th anniversary season. So like that's an organization that's been around in that community for a long time, and there's a lot of history there as well. And they've brought two championships to the community as well. So it was really special to be part of that team and that history.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you mentioned, COVID really, really did a number on everybody in terms of life, career, and everything. And it worked out, though, because as you would head over to Moncton and then to where you are today right now. So take us back to that moment that you got the call to go to the NHL, specifically the Winnipeg Jets.
But like I still get chills thinking about it a little bit, but that was pretty surreal for sure. So just like we talked a bit about Fort Francis. And so obviously a really small community. So when I lived in Ottawa, to go home at the time, there wasn't even a direct flight option. It's a bit better now, but at the time I had to take a flight from Ottawa to Toronto, which was about an hour. And then you're looking at a half hour to an hour layover. And then you're going Toronto to Thunder Bay, Ontario. And then someone was driving 4 hours from Fort Francis, Ontario to Thunder Bay to pick you up. And then we're driving together 4 hours back home. So I've got the 1 hour plane ride, the layover, the 2 hour plane ride, and then a 4 hour drive. And then it would have been usually my parents are doing an 8 hours of driving to the airport and picking me back. So from like door to door, it was like a 12-hour day to get home. And then I only ever did, just because of COVID and stuff, I only ever did one trip home from Moncton. But obviously like that was Moncton to Toronto to Thunder Bay and the drive. So I think that might have been like 14 hours or something. But so obviously like to get home was pretty long and difficult and expensive. So I was only going home once or twice a year. So when I had the opportunity to talk to the Jets, and because if I ever wanted to work at a high level of sports and be close to home, Winnipeg was always the only option really. So when I got the confirmation that I got the job with the Jets, when I called my parents, I remember just saying to my mom, like, I'm coming home. And that was pretty special for everybody, especially like being at that point, it had been 18 months since March 2020 and the pandemic had been long. And I was out in Atlantic, Canada by myself for a while. So to reset and come closer to home. And now I can just, Winnipeg to Fort Francis is also 4 hours. So whenever I want to go home, I can just hop in the car and drive myself whenever I want. So it's really special being close to home now.
That is amazing. That is amazing. And that's the best setup when you get to go to work that's close or reasonably close to home. And yeah, no, chills. Yeah, it was chills. I remember seeing that update on your social media, and I'm just like, yeah, I was so happy. I was just like, yo, you made it. You made it.
Yeah, it was special for sure. It was just like I was never a guy that got homesick, right? Like I loved Ottawa, I loved Moncton, but just the opportunity to come that close and maybe a little bit quicker than I had imagined in my head, but so just to be able to take on that opportunity and that challenge at that point in my career is just so special.
Yeah. So first day at the job.
Yeah. Oh, like it's such a blur. I don't even remember. Like I think so the organization hired 2 social media managers at that time. So my colleague Katie McLeod started like a week earlier than me. So I just remember like getting in and meeting her and meeting the team. And because it was like, you know, now they got two brand new social media managers and they had only previously had one. So it was big for the organization because there's now, you know, more hands to take on more responsibility. I think like I have to go back and look, but I think like me and Katie on our first day, like we either chirped a fan or chirped the Oilers or somebody online. Like we got going at it right away. We hit the ground running. Like it was either some fan like tweeted something about Connor Hellebuck, and we're like, oh, you mean the guy that like literally just won the Vezina like a year or two ago? Like what? Or it was either that or like the Edmonton Oilers had tweeted like, what was your favorite memory from last season? So then we went and shared it and tweeted the goal of like Kyle Connor scoring in overtime to eliminate them from the playoffs. So that was like our first day, I think. But like, you know, all those first few days and those first few weeks kind of blurred together because we started in the middle of August, and then by mid-September, you know, the players are starting to report to camp, and you got to figure out what you're going to do for the, you know, a lot of teams call them a production day or a car wash day, where you get your one day of the undivided attention of the players, and you get your 15 minutes to try and run them through as much video and content and scripted stuff as you can. So that all came together really quickly. Like I think it was like my second or third week when the players started coming back to the city, and then we could go to the practice rink and take pictures of them skating around. And like I just remember going and standing behind the net to take pictures, and then I had to stop after 2 or 3 minutes because the pucks were hitting the glass and it was so loud my ears were ringing. And that was kind of like, that was my first welcome to the NHL moment, because I was like, okay, these guys shoot the puck a lot harder than the university guys. Like, wow. So yeah, those first few days, months, weeks, it all blurred together. And like the very first game of the season was on the road. We were in Anaheim to start, and so just like my first NHL regular season game being in like Anaheim, California, and it was just crazy. And it was like one of the players for Anaheim was Benoit Olivier Groux, and he was an alum of the Moncton Wildcats, and he was making his NHL debut. And I didn't work with BO when I was in Moncton. Our time didn't cross, but it was like 2 Moncton Wildcats for the opposing teams. Like I remember the Moncton guys who were still there made a joke about it on their Twitter account. But yeah, it was just like all those first few months were just such a blur, and it was very special.
Yeah.
I'm just special a lot, but like, hey, this whole journey is definitely been really special.
Yeah, it truly has been. So what's a day in the life of working at the Winnipeg Jets like?
Yeah. I think that's what I love the most, is like every day is completely different. So like it depends on what kind of day we're talking about. So like let's run through today. It's 8:00 here in Winnipeg as we're filming this right now. Today was the first day of main training camp for the Winnipeg Jets. So I was over at the rink to be at the practice facility for 10 a.m. when our first group of skaters went out on the ice. So since we've got 2 social media managers, we have the luxury to be really flexible of dividing and conquering and having a lot of coverage of different aspects at once. So my colleague Katie was focused on, taking pictures and keeping the Twitter and Instagram stories and stuff up to date. And then I was focusing on some vertical video for our Instagram Reels and our TikToks, and doing some TikTok live. So I did a live stream this morning where we're giving some fans a bit of a behind the scenes access and getting a look at our first training camp practice of the day, which is especially great to connect with fans that say don't live in Winnipeg and can't come to these open practices in person. And then what was really cool was a day like today, you get a curveball, which was something that you weren't planning for. And that was our top prospect from this past draft in the summer, Colby Barlow. We got notified that he was signing his first contract in the NHL. And so I had the opportunity to go into the dressing room with Colby and our general manager, Kevin Cheveldayoff, and take that picture of him signing his first contract. And so it's just it's exciting to think about, like, this is an 18-year-old hockey player, a first-round pick with a lot of potential. And I'm there in the room for some of these big moments of his career when he was drafted in the first round in Nashville, and I was signing this contract. And so we put that out on social media and shared in that excitement with the fans. And then as well, there was, there was still another skate in the afternoon to do. So then it was right back out towards the ice and capturing some more content. And we've got a great team on our hockey information side that are capturing the interviews that are going on with the media and putting that on the website. And I'm taking those videos and putting it on our social media to make sure the fans see it. And then like that, just that alone got us like 5 or 6 o'clock tonight. And then I still had some photos to edit that we took at our rookie tournament that I want to share with some of the players to help encourage them to publish on their social medias and stuff. And then boom, it's time to record this podcast. So that's just the one day in training camp, and we still got 3 more days of training camp, and then you got 6, hopefully 8, 9 months of regular season. So I really like the ebbs and flows of, you get like, the summer gets pretty quiet, so I'm like really itchy to be busy again and work these ridiculous like 16-hour days and have that adrenaline of the game day again. So that's really exciting. And you know, everyone's always fired up at the start of the season, right? Everyone's got endless potential and excitement, and I think this could be a really good year for our team as well. So it's just really fun getting up and going to the rink every day and trying to capture cool moments and photos and videos and sharing that on social media.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating. Yeah, that's fun. That's a lot of fun, you know, having to do all of this at the same time. But I mean, that's a lot, and that's the best part of it. It may be long hours, but because every day is so different, and you're always doing something, you're always interacting with people, and it's like to borrow a Forrest Gump quote, life is like a box of chocolates. You know, you never know what you're gonna get.
Well, to go with another overused phrase, but just like if what your work, if you're doing something that you love, you're never really working at all, right? So it's cheesy, but it's applicable for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the greatest challenges in your job at the Winnipeg Jets?
Oh, that's a great question. I think just some people just kind of they see the glamour of like, oh, you're in the NHL, and you know, every day must be amazing. But at the end of the day, like, it's still a job like anything else, right? So there's some good days and some bad days and stuff. But I think I'm just really lucky here that we've got like a really strong team of people collaborating and putting together a lot of content. So like, I remember looking back at some of the earlier parts of my career where I was maybe one person wearing 9 different hats. Well, now I'm one person wearing one hat and part of a team of 9 that's like working together and making some really incredible stuff. Like there's some videos we put out on social media and it goes viral and gets a ton of attention, but there might have been 4, 5, 6 people that contributed to making that happen, right? So I think I don't really dwell too much on the negative, I'd say, if that's maybe a cop-out of avoiding your answer, but it's really fun to be a part of this team here in Winnipeg.
Yeah. And you mentioned how there's a misconception of, you know, that allure being in the NHL. What are the other greatest misconceptions that you've experienced in your career thus far? And it doesn't have to necessarily just be in the NHL. It could be just in every experience that you've had so far.
I think maybe just looking back at my own career, I was so focused on that pinnacle at that top goal of reaching the NHL that maybe I didn't always properly appreciate the steps along the way. Because like we talked about, right? We got all this nostalgia for the University of Ottawa, and I had a great time and developed great relationships when I was there, and I certainly enjoyed it in the moment. But I think looking back on it, I enjoy it even more. And would I go redo one of those years early at uOttawa with the knowledge I have now? I think it'd be a blast, right? So I think for people that are aspiring for this big end goal in their career, maybe make sure to appreciate the steps along the way as well, because there's definitely going to be a point where you miss it. You miss the people and you miss the experiences.
Yeah, I feel that sometimes as well, especially with university sport. I'm still doing university sport to a certain extent, but being involved in university sports coverage while also being a student at the same time, for me, was also a very unique experience, because you're sort of personally invested, but you also know the players and the players know you for the most part.
Peers, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I still have a couple of good friends who I still keep in occasional contact with once in a while, who we've met through sports. One of them's also a lawyer over in BC. So it's something that I do miss personally as well. And it's, you and I both know this, the opportunities to get into sportscasting, especially here in Canada, they aren't as many as people who aren't in the industry. They aren't as many as people might think. It's actually quite difficult to get into it.
Yeah, like I really lucked out, I would say, in terms of a right place, right time, where you had mentioned Carlos Verde real early on in the podcast, a mutual friend of ours. And just in my first year of school, he said, like, hey, do you want to do color commentary with me? I need a color commentary guy. And I'm like, well, I've never done it before in my life. And he was like, well, I don't care. And so I was just going based off of like everything I had heard of Jim Houston and Craig Simpson for the past 10 years, right? And that kind of transformed into the opportunity to do some play-by-play as well. And I loved the experience, but just part of how some of the structure was at University of Ottawa and some of the demands of the sports information side, it was kind of you needed to be a broadcaster, you needed to be a writer. There wasn't really an opportunity to take on both roles at once. And I had kind of thought about it, and I thought, well, I think a writer is going to open up more doors for me than, say, a broadcaster. So that was the route I chose. And it certainly worked out. Like, I'm not writing articles day to day anymore like I used to. But, one of the things I took a lot of pride in last year with the Jets was having some pretty creative tweets when we won a game that would kind of be funny and tongue in cheek, but not necessarily mean or rude, and that was part of some of that creative writing that I just developed over those years of being a writer. So the broadcasting was a ton of fun, but there's not a ton of those opportunities in Canada, and even fewer just as a full-time role. And there's, I remember Victor Finley was a guy that was broadcasting, now it's Toronto Metropolitan University, doing those games. And I remember we had like Victor come down to Ottawa and broadcast a game with us. And now this season, Victor's the radio play-by-play guy for the Montreal Canadiens. Like how surreal is that, right? Just these friends and these connections you make in university, and just seeing how far everyone's gone in their careers. That's been really cool to stay connected with all those guys over these years.
Yeah, it's very difficult, as you mentioned, because of just how few opportunities there are. And for my work, as you know, I focused on the broadcasting side, on play-by-play. It's so few far in between. And sometimes, in some periods, it almost feels like you have to create your own opportunities. Like, at least from my own personal experience, I never had a journalism or communications background, so I had to claw my way into it, sort of. I got really lucky, though. I mean, I remember a guy named Taylor was the sports information coordinator. Taylor Pritchard. Yes, I remember him now.
Oh, yeah.
Taylor Pritchard. Yeah, he was the sports information coordinator at Carleton, and he was the one who got me into play-by-play. I was originally the PA announcer, as you remember. Yeah. And that was such... I'm forever grateful for that, because if it wasn't for his willingness to have me in, frankly, I wouldn't have been able to host a podcast, because you mentioned the journey. I feel like each and every step of the journey that I've taken personally has led me to do a lot of things that I normally wouldn't have been able to do, or wouldn't have had the confidence to do, because I didn't have those skills in hand. So, and I'm always grateful, because, even though I'm not doing the NHL, I'm still very grateful to be doing some form of this, even after all these years, because it's also really difficult to stay in this area, because if you're not doing the NHL, if you're not doing the NBA, you or any other top professional league, it's very, very difficult to make ends meet on just sportscasting alone. Frankly, it's impossible.
And I think, like I said too, we can all kind of define what our own NHL is. Like, sure, the NHL is the best hockey league in the world for the players on ice, but isn't necessarily also the best league in the world for the people off the ice. I don't think necessarily, and that's not a disrespect to anyone working for any of these teams, but I think, like, as you say, like, if you're wanting to pursue this career in broadcasting and announcing, like, who's to say that the NHL has to be the end goal? It doesn't have to be the end goal. It could be whatever. I think whatever satisfies you and whatever makes you happiest at the end of the day should be what that end goal is.
Exactly. And that perfectly said. Everyone's running their own race, honestly, in this profession. And I think for many other professions, even in the world of law, it's the same thing. You don't have to be a Bay Street lawyer making, or at a Seven Sisters firm like Faskins or Torrey's or whatever. you can still be practicing outside of it and still be very successful in your own right and be, well, a legend in your own right.
Yeah.
Hence why we have this podcast here. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, frankly, for myself, even at the beginning, while the NHL was kind of like this weird pipe dream that I had, it wasn't like the be all and end all for me personally. That like the NHL wasn't my NHL personally. Yeah. I mean, of course, if you gave me an opportunity to do it, of course I'll do it. But it's not like it's that or nothing else, right? Yep. And I think that's what also helps not just myself, but for many people like yourself who've gone into this field, especially in Canada, and for those of our international viewers who aren't familiar with the Canadian and American scene, especially in Canada, hockey is the pastime for Canada. Mm-hmm. And by extension, many people who go into sports coverage, they mostly focus on hockey, maybe basketball, maybe football, American football, that is. Mm-hmm. But hockey by far is the big one. And because of that, the competition is huge in this industry for hockey. Yeah. When there's so many other sports, like you mentioned, rugby, that aren't as popular in Canada, those sports need coverage, but there doesn't tend to be a lot of competition there, like the more niche areas. So I think that's what also gave us these opportunities to really build ourselves, because if we were just focusing on one sport, we wouldn't get very far.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, no. And because of the difficulty that you and I have faced in our own careers and all the obstacles that we've overcome, what are the most important lessons that you've learned from your career thus far?
I think I'm just trying to take every experience and learn something from it. I think as cheesy as that sounds, like, I think it's been cool to look back and some things that I did, say at the University of Ottawa, that worked really well. I brought it forward with me in Moncton and continue to do today in Winnipeg. Like, I still keep in touch with some of the players that were on some of those early hockey teams at the University of Ottawa. And it's been cool chatting with them. And I tell them like the stuff that I was doing with you guys isn't all that different than what I'm doing in the NHL now. So like, without you guys, I don't get to this point, which is really cool to just be able to go back to all these people from early in my career and show that appreciation for how pivotal they were in getting me to where I am, and how, if they don't make that impact, maybe I'm not where I am today.
Yeah. And that sort of appreciation is, it's so important for us to look retrospectively, because it's always about the journey, as you said.
Yeah.
So it's the journey and the friends we made along the way that build us up to who we are.
Yeah.
Cheesy cliche, but a very important value in life, honestly, with any profession that you have there. And what advice would you give to aspiring sportscasters or people who just want to be involved in sports journalism or coverage?
Yeah, I think the big one is I'm a big believer in being present and talking to people. Like, obviously running a NHL social media account, like I'm looking in the mentions and stuff, right? And you see sometimes, and it was something I tried out as well when I was young, but you've got kids writing articles that are, here's the top 5 winners and losers of the NHL draft and stuff, or they're just kind of, maybe regurgitating is not the right word, but they're putting out a lot of content just kind of based on stuff that they're gathering online. And I think there's a ton of value in going out to the rinks or the soccer fields or the basketball courts and talking to the athletes and talking to the coaches and asking questions and learning from them and writing stuff based on something you've created yourself. Like, I think that experience, like we talked about right at the start with the Carleton and talking to these hockey teams, like, boy, I asked some stupid questions in that first year. Like, I remember the university, they would play 2 games in 2 nights and they got blown out in the second night. And I'm asking the players if how much fatigue was a factor and having to play these 2 games in the span of 22 hours. And the guys are telling me, well, we played 3 games in 3 nights in the OHL. Like, this is nothing, man. Like, but you're not going to learn that kind of stuff anywhere else. And I think there's a ton of value in just getting that experience, because as a young writer, it's really difficult to get that access with the very elite athletes and the NHL caliber coaches and stuff. So I think working your way from the ground up is huge. I think I look at if I tweet a tweet with a typo on the Winnipeg Jets account, I've got 5 people pointing it out before you can snap your fingers. But if I put out a typo on the GG's Men's Hockey account, the pressure is much lower because there's fewer eyeballs, right? So I think being able to learn, and with learning comes making mistakes, and making some mistakes on these smaller scales helped prepare me to make these jumps to the higher levels where there's more eyeballs and there's more pressure and there's more scrutiny, and there's more demands as well. So I think, just to sum up all my rambling right there, I think there's no better way for students to learn than to do. So any opportunity you can get with a local outlet somewhere, your local community league or something, just writing, and with the internet now, anyone can create their own platform. So it's, making your own little website, but writing about the local junior hockey teams in your community, or just the athletes in your community. For one, that was something I started off with in my hometown, was reaching out to athletes from my own community and writing about them because no one else was.
And how do you tell a good sports story?
Oh, is that your finale question? Because I don't know how else we're going to top that one. But how to tell a sports story? I think you really want to hook. You really want to captivate your audience and make sure they walk away and learn something new. If I look at my own work today, one of the most popular content pieces I create is we call it life questions. And I'm just throwing these random questions at our players and seeing what kind of answer we get. And it might be something as simple as, what's your favorite pizza? And we have some of our players like Dylan DeMello take it really seriously, and he spends a minute just thinking about the question and talking about, well, I want this pizza with this nice thin crust, and it's got to have peppers and onions and mushrooms, but we're absolutely not putting pineapples on it. And it's really showcasing this personality of the players. And I think what captivates people from it is they're seeing a side of these athletes that they're not getting anywhere else. So I think that's what really brings value to fans and to people, that if you're learning something new from the story, that's going to be the number one. Whether you're taking away a lesson or just a personality trait of the person that we're talking about, as long as you gain something from the experience, it brings a lot of value.
It certainly does. And speaking about bringing a lot of value and captivating audiences, where can people find you on social media?
Oh boy. Well, if I don't really like calling it X, but if Twitter is still around when people are watching this podcast, you can find me on Twitter at CGRP1919. I don't post too often, but because when you're running a social media account from 9 to 5, the last thing you really want to do from 5 to 9 is post on your own Twitter account. But there's also a really cool platform now called Gondola, which was created for people in this industry that are content creators for any type of organization, not just sports. And it allows you to import social media posts and put a tag on it and say what you contributed to that content piece. So I'm able to import Jets pieces and say, this was my photo, or I edited this video, or that sort of thing. So it's pretty cool how it spits out data and tells me that all these videos I've made throughout my career, combining uOttawa and Moncton and Winnipeg, it's like 40 million views as part of these videos I've created, which is pretty surreal to look at. So I've got it set up that if someone types in CameronPenney.com, Penney, Penney, it's going to redirect them to Gondola, and you can see some samples. It's basically an online portfolio showing off some of the best work we've done with the Jets and some of my favorite projects.
That's amazing. That is an amazing platform to take a look at. And once again, I think the audience is going to be very, very interested in looking at that. And also, they can also follow the Winnipeg Jets social media as well to see.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Threads, LinkedIn, YouTube. I think we got a Jiffy account if you can follow that. Follow the Jets everywhere for sure.
Follow them all. Yeah, well, Cameron, thank you so very much for taking time out of your very busy schedule, especially at the very, very beginning of the NHL season as of the recording date of this episode. I think the audience has learned a lot from this and has gained an insight into an area that they may not necessarily know or immersed in, but what they will certainly know is the living legend of Cameron Penney.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
And thank you to our audience for tuning in to the living legend of Cameron Penney on This Is the Legend of. Once again, you can follow him on all of the social media and his uOttawa platform, as he mentioned it earlier just a few minutes ago. Once again, thanks again, and stay tuned for more great content. Follow us on our social media and as well as on our website, thisisthelegendof.com. If you like, you can donate to us on our PayPal page as well. You can find that on our website. Thank you so much for watching or listening, depending on the platform. Signing off for now, this is Amos Vang. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay legendary.